Mr. Speaker, I yield 5 minutes, or really as much time as he may consume, to the gentleman who responded to Martin Luther King when he first met him as a young man in Alabama, John Robert Lewis. I yield time.
So Lewis is recognized for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank my friend and colleague, the gentleman from Memphis, Tennessee, Mr. Cohen, for yielding. Mr. Speaker, 45 years ago, on March 7, 1965, Jose William and I led 600 peaceful, nonviolent protesters attempting to march from Selma, Alabama, to the state capitol in Montgomery to dramatize to the world that people of color wanted to register to vote. We left Brown Chapel AME Church that afternoon on a sacred mission, prepared to defy the dictates of man to demonstrate the truth of a higher law. Ordinary citizens with extraordinary vision walked shoulder to shoulder, 2 by 2, in a silent, peaceful protest against injustice in the American South. We were met on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River, by a sea of blue Alabama state troopers. Some were mounted on horseback, but all of them were armed with guns, tear gas, billy clubs, and beyond them were deputized citizens who were waving any weapons they could find on that day. Some even had bullwhips. Then we heard, and Major John Cloud, this is an unlawful march. You cannot continue. You have 3 minutes to go home or return to your church. We were preparing to kneel and pray when the major said, "Troopers, advance." And these troopers came toward us, beating us, spraying tear gas, chasing us. I was hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick, and I felt unconscious on the bridge. On that day, Mr. Speaker, I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw death. The most brutal confrontation of the modern-day civil rights movement became known as Bloody Sunday. It produced a sense of righteous indignation in this country and around the world that led this Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965. 8 days after Bloody Sunday, President Lyndon Johnson addressed a joint session of the Congress and made what I believe is the greatest and most meaningful statement of speech any president had ever made on the importance of voting rights in America. He began by saying, "I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy." President Johnson went on to say, "At times, history and fate meet in a single time in a single place to shape a turning point in man's unending search for freedom." So it was at Lexington and Concord. So it was a century ago at Appomattox. So it was last week in Selma, Alabama. In this speech, President Johnson condemned the violence in Selma and called on the Congress to enact the Voting Rights Act. He closed his speech by echoing the words of the civil rights movement. And he said over and over again, "And we shall overcome, and we shall overcome." I was sitting next to Martin Luther King Jr. in the home of a local family in Selma, watching President Johnson on television as he said, "And we shall overcome." And tears came down Dr. King's face. He started crying. And we all cried a little to hear the president say, "And we shall overcome." And Dr. King said, "John, we will make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act will be passed." Congress did pass the Voting Rights Act, and on August 6, 1965, it was signed into law by the President. Now, Mr. Speaker, this past weekend, we've heard from the Majority Leader and my colleagues, Mr. Cohen, and Mr. Kai, that we went back to Selma, along with Mike Pence and Senator Brownback and several others, with Faith and Politics Institute on a journey. During this journey, we brought our fellow members of Congress on this unbelievable trip of the historic civil rights sites, not just in Selma, but Montgomery and Birmingham. We ended our time together in Selma by crossing one more time on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing that bridge. I know at times here in this body, we talk, we debate, maybe sometime in not such a nonviolent way. But on this bridge, we didn't see ourselves as Democrats or as Republicans or adversaries. We saw ourselves as Americans on a journey to discover not just our history, but to help create a more perfect union, to help move us closer to a truly beloved community, truly closer to a multiracial democracy. We all come away from this journey with a deeper appreciation of our democracy and the power of people to make a difference in our society. Mr. Speaker, with this resolution, we honor the sacrifice and courage of those brave and courageous souls who used the power of peace, the power of love, the power of nonviolence to redeem the soul of our democracy. We remind ourselves that freedom is really not free, that we must continue to struggle every day. On this 45th anniversary of Bloody Sunday, we must use this occasion to renew our pledge to protect the right to vote for every American citizen. We have come a distance. We made a lot of progress, but there's still a distance to travel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I yield back the balance of my time.